Hello YouTubers, today I have something a little bit different for you. Well, in that I haven't got a very strict lesson planned or idea, but what I basically want to do is talk about scales and how we use scales and what the whole point of scales, what's the whole thing about with scales. So the first thing I want to say is that, scales are really about educating your ear more than anything else. One of the first things I want to talk about is how people say, how do we make a scale sound good? Or they might say, well, I've learnt a scale, but it doesn't sound like you when you play. That's a little bit like teaching someone how to throw a punch and then getting him to jump in a boxing ring. It doesn't quite work that way. You see, it takes a long time to develop your phrasing and your ideas. So let me show you a couple of things. So if we play a major scale, okay, of course that's going to sound quite boring if we put on, if we noodle around with that, especially with that awkward rhythm. Of course it's not going to sound like, bebop or jazz or anything like that, or whatever you're trying to achieve, because that stuff, generally there's a language that's been developed over a long period of time and by someone who's spent a lot of time thinking hard about the sounds that they want. But there's the point there, sounds that you want. Developing your knowledge of scales helps you develop the ability to find the sounds that you want. So, for example, within that structure there, I've got these ideas that I want to play, and I basically hear them as I go. But then it's still just a major scale. I didn't play a single note outside of that major scale, but it's different to maybe what you might do, and you could be a more accomplished player than I am, but it's going to be different, because it's all about the path that you've taken to get where you are as a player. If you learn a whole bunch of Charlie Parker heads, you're going to play more like that. If you might say you spend a whole bunch of time learning solos by Sal Salvador or Joe Pass or any of those guys, who probably all listen to a lot of the early horn players anyway, you're going to sound more like that. But it's, of course, the scales give you a structure in which to work from, and that's really the point of learning your scales. So I do recommend learning your scales and putting the time in and getting to know them and learning your keys and everything. But it's also, if you've got a great musical vocabulary, you listen to a lot of music and you work really hard at it, you can develop definitely a repertoire of sounds and licks and ideas by learning solos and stuff. So one of the other things that I kind of want to talk about is how should you spend your time practicing scales? A lot of my students ask me that, how do you practice scales, or what's the best and most effective way? The thing is, you see a lot of things on YouTube where people are talking about, this is the best way to learn your scales, learn this system, all the other systems don't work. But the irony is, a lot of these guys that come up with these systems, they've actually spent a lot of time working through the other systems, or lack of a system. And that leaves a huge thought fallacy, and that thought fallacy is that those other systems haven't had an impact on their playing. So by the time you decide to, use a different system, if you've worked on all these other ones, there's a huge amount of knowledge that comes with that anyway. So it's a little bit of a fallacy to say, well, playing root note to root note, that's something I practice. But for me to say this is the best way, this is the only way you'll really learn, the fastest way, it's kind of silly, because it took me years to work out that that's a great way to practice. And in the years it took me to work out that was a great way to practice, I was just practicing, straight across. Okay, so I say learn everything and anything you can and give everything a go and see what you like. That's one of the best things to do. Modes it's a great topic to talk about. Personally, I think modes are they're not really modes unless you're using them in the right context. If you say, I'm going to play key of G, you say, okay, so you play a G chord, right, and I go up to a B Phrygian. Oh, you can use B Phrygian over that. See, not really. That's just G. It's just the key of G. You're not actually doing anything new or interesting. You're just playing. Check it out. I mean, if I go. Oh, okay. I didn't quite hit the exact same lick that I did there, but you can see it's the same thing. It's the same bunch of notes. You're playing from the same note family. If you play G, and then you say, I'm going to actually play. If you say, I'm going to play G Lydian over G, now we're talking modes. Okay, so the useful thing about modes the useful understanding of modes is to say, well, in G, I'm going to use Lydian, and understanding that I'm using a particular tone that makes that interesting against a major scale, or instead of a major scale. So that's sharp 4. Okay, that's a really useful thing to know and to understand with your modes, to understand that Lydian means sharp 4. Now you get into this whole other context, and that is that this here is actually the key of D. So that's great, because now if you know your fretboard really well and you've learnt your major scales, you've got a whole new sound here. Okay? You got a whole new sound by playing a key that you're already familiar with. It's just a major scale. So that's how modes can be really useful, and understanding them in terms of knowing their key. Johnny Smith, a great jazz guitar player, talked to he wasn't really a big fan of modes. He felt like it's a bit of a pre-constructed thing, and you're not finding the sound yourself, and saying I want to play this note instead of that note. But this is another thing, don't get caught up on anything anyone says. I mean, I'm a huge Johnny Smith fan. I have heaps of respect, but I don't fully agree with that statement right there, because again, it's about educating your ear, and I guarantee Johnny Smith came to that conclusion probably after working through modes, and then he went, there's not really much point to this. I understand it this way, but surely he did the work. So it's always a fallacy. I know it's sacrilege to say that in reference to Johnny Smith. He's one of the ultimates, but it is a fallacy to say, what, I worked through that, I did that, and there's not really any use to it. Well, of course you've got used to it, even coming to that conclusion. So that's why, again, I urge you, when it comes to scales and all those kinds of things, try everything and anything. For example, here are the 3 things I've done over the years. So, sorry it's taken this long. I hope you've enjoyed my rant. This is what my students cop every day. So anyway, obviously, I work through all of the shapes within the major scale, which a lot of people refer to as modes. You can. I don't think of them as modes unless I'm using them as modes. So, of course, that's Ionian. And this one here, you can think of that as Dorian, right? But if we're just thinking of them all as the key of G, this is how I like my students to work. So we go. In fact, I like to stop on the octave. So then we know what the next half sounds like. Then we go up to Dorian, or position 2. And with a lot of students, I'll just call it position 2 as not to confuse them. Alright, especially if they're just getting into this stuff. And we stop on that G. Why? We're keeping it in the context of the key of G. One thing at a time. Okay? Then from here, stop on the G. Okay? Now if I'm going too fast, look, honestly, this is more of a concept lesson for people that are hopefully, well and truly into this stuff. This is not so much, if you're a beginner. Well, it should be useful if you're a beginner as well. There's a few things going on, but yeah, it's more conceptual, if that makes sense. So we're at this point, we work up to our root note, and we move back to the lowest point in that position and work back up to that root note. So you might be looking and go, well, isn't A the root note? No, we're thinking of G, we're playing the family of G. We're sticking in G, so we want to keep finding G. Okay, G to G, got to the highest point in that position and come back to G. Now what this does is it develops a muscle memory from the root note of whatever finger you grab it with. Okay, it's really useful. If I grab a root note in any key from here, I know what's going to follow straight away. And finding the root note in a key is generally pretty achievable for an aspiring jazz musician, I would imagine. I guess I just said jazz, which categorizes what this video is kind of aimed at, but any style. Okay, so we'd move up to the next position. We'd stop on that G. This is in G major, by the way. Stop on G. Stop on G. So in each spot, we're finding the root note. So we're really learning G major all the way up the neck, okay? I'm going to do a series on this eventually, okay? When I get some time, I'm going to make a course and we'll work through, we might even do a key a week or something like that. So for some of you loyal followers there, that might be really cool, especially if you want to brush up on that. Even if you kind of know what you're doing, this way of practicing all up and down the neck is a really cool. It's not necessarily, I think it's quite useful, but again, I've spent a lot of time just learning the box shapes as well. So I think you've got to do a bit of work on everything. Now that's one method that I'm really working with students at the moment. Another fantastic method I do find really helpful is playing in an angular fashion like this. Okay, and so 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4. Now I like to repeat those fingers in the next position. 2, I've moved up to there, new octave, second finger again. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4. And then we start from here, we do it again. 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4. Then we do it in the reverse, always starting with our pinky. Okay. Now this is good because you know what each finger is going to sound like if you practice it enough and you start to develop that as memory. So yeah, that's a really cool method, to work on an angular fashion. You can do it major, minor, and try to use the same fingers, even when we shift up. Still using first and third, like I did there. Okay, so all of this goes into developing, your knowledge. So when you're improvising over a chord, for example. All of the box shapes that you learn in one major key, they apply to every key, every mode. They're all related, it's all one thing. So learning your major keys is the very first step. But once you've done that, there's pathways for your fingers to follow, there's sounds for your ears to work off. And you put tracks on and you jam and you make mistakes, and I make tons of mistakes. I do it in my videos, I do it live gigs. That's another huge thing. So, and then the next thing is, and one of the first things you should do when you start improvising is just singing your ideas and trying to hear your ideas. I can't stress this enough. Like if I want to play, okay, let's say we just, okay, so I'm not going to embarrass myself on camera and sing and play everything, but a lot of my ideas I've sort of worked on slowly and sung them and tried to hear note for note, or even just writing your own ideas note for note is really, really useful. Okay. again, that's years and years of practice. That's not going to happen overnight. But I mean, I remember writing out my own ideas 7-8 years ago, you know, and spending a lot of time writing my own ideas. And then from there, it becomes a bit more of an organic process. You can literally almost write as you're playing, and that's really helpful. So yeah, that's a whole bunch of thoughts on scales. And I really didn't, again, I didn't plan it out extremely well, but I hope that you found it useful. Of course, if there's any questions for maybe more structured lessons that you might like, just shoot some comments and let me know what you think. Just quickly too, I never do this, but today I'm actually playing through my deluxe reverb. I've got a super overdrive and the timeline delay on the tape one, which I've actually got the El Capistan, which is apparently a little better. But yeah, that's my tone right now, and I've got the tone knob rolled down a little. It's a really cool sound. Anyway, I just sort of drifted off there on another thing. Maybe I'll do another video about that. So thanks for watching. Again, subscribe, share these videos. It all really helps. One day I'll set up the things to make some money, but right now it's not really my priority. I'm just doing this for a bit of fun. But I do hope you've enjoyed. Thank you. See you later.